Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Flaren Eman and Tom Harwood on your TV, radio and online. We are with you until midday with the show jam-packed with today's biggest stories, lots of discussions, expert guests and our opinions as well as yours.
So make sure that you get in touch with your views as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. That's the address to email into. We'll be getting through those throughout the show. But first, it's time for the headlines.
A very good morning to you. Just 1 minute past 10. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Rising food prices have pushed inflation back to a 40-year high. The ONS figures show inflation rose to 10.1% in September. That's up from 9.9% the previous month. Labour says the growing cost of living will bring more anxiety to families, but the government has promised to prioritise help for the most vulnerable. The commitment to increase pensions, though, in line with inflation, remains in doubt after Downing Street confirmed the move is now under review. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, refused to confirm if the party will keep up the pension triple lock.
No, that will be deeply frustrating for the people that you've been talking to who are looking at those inflation figures, they are looking at those interest rate rises, and they are worried about them. And we completely get that, and we want to give them certainty as soon as we can. But it wouldn't be right for me to, as I say, speculate about what the Chancellor might be saying next week.
Well, Liz Truss is going to be quizzed over her leadership during Prime Minister's questions today. She's going to face the Labour leader for the first time since abandoning her economic strategy in the wake of the turmoil after the mini-budget. The Prime Minister is battling to convince Conservative MPs that she should remain in charge after a poll of party members showed 83% believe she's doing a bad job. The Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, told us the Conservatives lack stability.
What you're seeing at the minute is the government, frankly, put up a new idea every day, testing the water a little bit. You know, honestly, when inflation's the way it is, when mortgages are going up, when business investment's going down, I think that's incredibly bad because it's putting more anxiety out there when, frankly, the job of the government right now should be putting some calm and stability in place. But, of course, they are themselves the cause of this crisis because of that mini-budget 3 weeks ago.
A report into maternity failings at East Kent Hospital's NHS Trust is due to be published shortly. Now, it's expected to say that newborn babies died due to poor care spanning several years. The report findings are also set to show that families were often ignored or had their concerns overlooked. More than 200 cases dating back to 2009 have been examined by an expert panel. MPs say NHS understaffing is creating a serious risk to patient safety in England. A new report from the Health and Social Care Committee shows a shortfall of 12,000 doctors and more than 50,000 nurses and midwives. It's after a letter was sent to staff by health leaders setting out resilience plans as the NHS prepares for one of its toughest winters in its history. Retired midwife Neymar Tamarin Yates told us recruitment and retention is a growing problem.
They are all at the situation in life and the place in their lives that they can't afford not to be there. But we have got a lot of newly qualified staff, and that is where the problem with retention comes. When I look at the unit that I used to work in, how many women we were delivering, how many babies we had, and how many staff we had per shift.
Yeah.
Now we are still running with the same number of staff, but our delivery rate has actually nearly doubled.
The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is in Washington to discuss security concerns, including Russia's war with Ukraine. Well, it's after Moscow said the 4 regions it illegally annexed now fall under the protection of Russia's nuclear arsenal. Ukraine has accused Russia of using Iranian drones during recent attacks in recent weeks, which both countries have denied. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the reliance on Tehran is a sign of how much the Kremlin's struggling.
The very fact that Russia has sought help from Iran is an admission by the Kremlin that it's bankrupt in military and political terms. Strategically, it'll not help them in the least. It'll simply show the world that once again Russia is headed for defeat and is trying to drag yet another one of its accomplices into this terror.
Criminal justice experts say a safety rating is needed on social media to protect children from online harm. A report suggests a 5-star measuring system could indicate how safe a site is for young people. Crest Advisory also recommends age verification through a national alert system to notify parents of any threats online. You're up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now, back to Patrick and Anaya.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falaren and Tom Harwood on your TV, radio and online. We've got a great show lined up to kickstart your day, so here's what's coming up.
Yes, the Prime Minister Liz Truss will face her first grilling from MPs since those series of mini-budget U-turns. That's at Prime Minister's Questions later today. Watch live on GB News from noon today. One poll suggests that 50% of Tory members want Truss to quit. So will she be able to turn her popularity around?
Well, inflation is back in double digits, rising from 9.9 to 10.1%. Our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, will be here to explain what these figures might mean for you and how much this is going to impact ordinary people every day.
And a union representing head teachers is balloting its members for the first time in, get this, 125 years. Is this type of industrial action ever justified, regardless of what state our education system is in? Are some institutions more important? We want to know what you think. Should teachers go on strike?
Well, as usual, get in touch with your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Well, our top story this morning, the Prime Minister Liz Truss will face her first grilling by MPs since, of course, those series of U-turns around that mini-budget. Of course, the first big U-turn being announced quite a while ago, but then a series more from Friday and Monday. Now, you'll be able to watch Prime Minister's Questions on GB News later today from midday.
Indeed, while Truss's popularity figures are tanking, a new YouGov poll gave her a popularity score of -70%. Her predecessor, Boris Johnson, scored -53% the day he resigned back in July. While the poll also said that over 50% of Conservative members want her to quit. Truss also has come under criticism over suggestions that the government might ditch promises to protect triple-lock pensions, with some MPs saying they will vote against this in Parliament.
Well, let's go now live to Downing Street, where our political reporter Catherine Forster has the latest. And Catherine, it's interesting looking at this poll of the membership. One name that actually got a plurality in terms of who should replace Liz Truss, not a majority, but a plurality, was Boris Johnson.
Well, yes, but the problem, of course, is that the Conservative MPs got rid of him not very long ago. So the chances of him being brought back, I would say, are close to zero, but never say never, if not now, possibly in the future. But clearly today, Liz Truss is facing MPs for a big Prime Minister's Questions. It's only the third in her very short 6-week premiership to date. Supporters will be hoping for a strong performance after last Friday's press conference, the 4 questions, and then sending Leader of the House of Commons on Monday to answer the urgent question. She has looked very much like she is lacking authority, and to some extent her confidence appeared to be draining away. So can she perform strongly? Can she get back on the front foot? Now, she may hasten her departure if things go badly for her today. She may, best case scenario really, is simply that she buys herself a bit of time. I was talking to an MP who had drinks in number 10 with her last night. She is on a charm offensive, meeting groups of MPs. He was saying that she was positive, she was upbeat, that there was definitely an agreement that the party and the country indeed needed a period of calm, needed unity. He was saying they are very, very aware that the people do not like to see politicians squabbling amongst themselves. But even he did say, if this goes well, she's got till the 31st of October, potentially. He did think it was recoverable, but the general mood is that sooner or later MPs will move to take her out, which of course would be the 5th Prime Minister if they did this in the spate of just 6 years. And to many people, it does seem like that the Conservative Party itself is becoming increasingly ungovernable.
Well, thank you so much, Catherine Forster, our political reporter. Well, let's talk to Tim Montgomery, senior GB News contributor, and Kevin Maguire, associate editor of the Daily Mirror, to chew through some of this. I mean, I'll start with you, Tim. I mean, her popularity, as we said in the introduction, it is lower than what Boris Johnson was when he resigned. And Keir Starmer's Labour Party are polling in some polls at more than 50%. I mean, she can't survive, can she?
No, I don't think she honestly can. But I think I'm surprised actually things haven't moved more quickly this week. I thought actually we might have seen a challenge to her yesterday, for example, but she survived yesterday. And I think that means that today's PMQs is a particularly important test for her. And of course, there is a suspicion, dark hearts in Westminster, who would have thought it, that Keir Starmer might go a little bit gentle on her today, because it's probably in the Labour Party's interest for her to remain as Prime Minister, because she's so wounded, so unpopular, so incredible, that actually she's probably a bigger asset for the Labour Party to be kept in place than for the Conservative Party to find a leader who actually has the confidence of the public.
Now, Kevin Maguire, is Liz Truss still in post without a significant public move against her yet, simply because most parliamentarians believe that she's not actually in power, that the real Prime Minister, the man behind the curtain, is now Jeremy Hunt?
Yeah, Liz Truss, the pretend Prime Minister, Jeremy Hunt, the current real Prime Minister. I think there's a little something in that. But I think it's really because she's just been so recently elected by the Conservative Party and put in Downing Street. I think many Conservative MPs, and Nadine Dorries, the former Culture Secretary, big supporter of Boris Johnson, has made the point that it would be unprecedented in peacetime to go for 3 Prime Ministers in the same Parliament without having a general election. So Conservative MPs are in a bind here. What do they do? How do they get out of this? Because at the moment, they would lose their seats with Liz Truss. And they got rid of Boris Johnson because he was an electoral albatross. And let's not forget he was really unpopular when he was toppled. It's just that she is now even more unpopular. And Tim's right. Tim is absolutely right that Labour will be willing Liz Truss to survive because she is a great asset for Labour. Terrible for the Conservative Party and the country, but great for Labour at the moment. However, I think what Keir Starmer will attempt to do is tie all the others into this chaos, all the other Conservatives. So it's not just about Liz Truss, it's also about Jeremy Hunt, Rishi Sunak to some extent, Penny Mordaunt. They've all been around. This is their government. It's the Conservatives.
Oh, we seem to have lost...
As if she is pushed, a new face comes in, the Conservative Party then can argue, look, we've credibly changed, you want to change, you've got change. So they've got to paint all the others with the same brush.
It was so interesting listening to Sir Keir Starmer on Monday. He kept talking about non-DOMs. Now, to most people, that's sort of not particularly relevant to the current political situation until you realise that might be a veiled attack at the person he expects to be the next Prime Minister, potentially Rishi Sunak.
Well,
yeah, I think that's right. You go for the next one. Look, she's finished today. He's got to mercilessly mock her. I don't think he goes easy on her. He's got to be careful because he's a man, she's a woman. Everyone knows she's injured. In some ways, it'll be like clubbing a baby seal. You've got to be careful you don't appear bully. But you've got to go for the others. That's got to be the Labour strategy. He's got to make sure that the Conservatives can't just shuffle Truss off and say, look, we've got somebody else in, all decided by MPs next week or whenever, and off we go. It's going to be a fresh start. That's what he will be wary of, Storm. And that's why, as you say, he's going on about non-doms, because Rishi Sunak has a lot of baggage. Jeremy Hunt has a lot of baggage. Let's not forget what happened with the NHS. Under him, the tightest financial straitjacket in its history, left it ill-prepared for COVID. He'll have to go for them all. That's what he has to do. He's got to say, all the Tories, you're all in it together. It's all your responsibility. It's not just her.
Yeah, and taking that point to you, Tim, I mean, even though the authority of Liz Truss is very challenging right now, who could realistically replace her? Not just in terms of the lack of choices within the Conservative Party, but for the country, that only exacerbates an already incredibly unstable time.
Well, I don't know predicting things in politics at the moment is not an easy thing, but I think Rishi Sunak probably is the most organised within Parliament. He has MPs working their colleagues almost every hour. And so I think if there is to be a successor to Liz Truss, it's most likely to be him. Penny Mordaunt, I think, had quite a good parliamentary outing on Monday. I think she will present herself, if there is a real contest, as the person who can unite the party in a way that someone like Rishi Sunak, who was only rejected by party members quite recently, will struggle to do so. I think there is some support for Jeremy Hunt because he's the man that stabilised the situation over the last few days. But I think it's hard to see Jeremy Hunt, who came really last in the most recent Tory leadership election, really becoming Prime Minister. That certainly stretches some credibility. So I think probably Rishi Sunak, if we had to put money on it, is the likeliest person. Although members would love to see Boris return, I just don't think MPs would allow that.
And yet there are so many Conservative parliamentarians who have a visceral dislike for Rishi Sunak, that rejection from the membership as well. And then this idea allegedly from Michael Gove, just in the last 15 seconds or so, that there could be some sort of papal enclave to bring about the next Conservative leader, MPs going into a room and not leaving until they've settled on one that they can all agree upon. In 15 seconds, Kevin Maguire, is that possible at all?
No, they couldn't do it in 15 seconds, that's for sure. I would have thought we couldn't go through another 2 months election involving the Conservative members. One of the great strengths of the Conservative Party and why it's governed most of the past centuries is its flexibility and its thirst for power. So I suspect MPs will somehow have a coup. They will decide. But they could do Tuesday candidates, Wednesday candidates, Thursday candidates. They could even do 2 ballots a day. You could do it that way, I think, rather than lock everybody in a room and say you can't have any food or any water or go to the toilet until you agree. It's a sign of desperation. Michael Gove is suggesting that. But they could. It's going to be brutal. It's going to be hard. It may not be credible. I think this is operational.
Well, Tim, we've only got 10 seconds, so very quickly.
I just want to say, can we put Kevin Maguire in charge of the Tory selection process? It sounds like he's got all of the answers.
Well, the 1922 committee are meeting later today.
Meetings. I could do it for you, Tim. Of course, it's not my natural inclination.
Kevin, we've got to get you off to the Carlton Club this evening, Kevin. It's the 100th-year anniversary of the meeting that founded the 1922 committee. They're all having a dinner. We'll get you along there too. I'm afraid that's all we have time for in this discussion, but it's been a great joy. Tim Montgomery and Kevin Maguire, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I mean, I do think it is rather extraordinary. Rishi Sunak was the Chancellor during the last few years, now repositioning himself as the kind of new, fresh candidate. But it is fascinating in politics right now. After the break, inflation has risen by 0.2% from 9.9% to 10.1%. Our economics and business editor Liam Halligan will be here to explain all of that. That is just after the weather.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A bit of a cloudier day today for most. Some outbreaks of quite heavy rain in the west, and it's also in parts of the west where we've got some very gusty winds. Across the southwest, that's where we've got this area of low pressure that's been around for a while, and weather fronts throwing northwards from that weather system are bringing the heavy outbreaks of rain, some rumbles of thunder crossing Wales into parts of Northern Ireland. So quite a soggy scene here for much of the afternoon. Some of those heavy showers getting into parts of the West Midlands and maybe later today into northwest England. One or two more showers could come into the far southwest, but here generally turning drier. Some brighter spells across the southeast and particularly northwest Scotland with some sunshine. And it's pretty mild in the south, but it's also gusty, especially for southwest England and West Wales. Some very lively gusts of wind through this afternoon and this evening. During this evening, the rain showers will spread more across northern England and eventually overnight into parts of Scotland. Still some heavy bursts of rain likely. The odd rumble of thunder is possible. Further south, mostly dry, quite a lot of cloud around, a bit misty and murky in a few spots, and very mild. Temperatures staying in double figures for the majority. Thursday should be drier for Wales and Northern Ireland, but further east there will be some rain coming in. Some uncertainty about the timing of this rain, but it could make for quite a wet day for parts of southeast England and East Anglia, spreading up towards Yorkshire. Outbreaks of rain too continuing across eastern Scotland. So today most of the rain's in the west. Tomorrow most of the rain is in the east, but all the while it's going to be pretty mild, especially if we do see any sunshine. And tomorrow the winds will be lighter as well. Further outbreaks of rain perhaps coming up the eastern side as we go through Thursday evening, and then down to the southwest. Another band of rain arriving in between, turning largely dry with some clear spells. But those bands of showers move back across the country on Friday. The weather remaining pretty mixed into the weekend, but always pretty mild.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christie's. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Well, it's 10:23. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin-Iman and Tom Harwood. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
And inflation is back in double digits. It rose to 10.1% in September. That's up from 9.9% in August. Now, despite continuing falls in the costs of petrol, the Office for National Statistics, tricky word, said that the rise was driven by further increases to the price of food. which saw its largest annual rise in over 40 years.
Well, in response, the Chancellor Jeremy Hunt promised the government will prioritise help for the most vulnerable, while Labour's Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves said, quote, "This is a Tory crisis made in Downing Street and paid for by working people." Well, our economics and business editor Liam Halligan is with us right now. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. So inflation is increasing. What does this mean for ordinary people?
Well, it means that, according to the ONS, the cost of living, the average basket of goods and services that we use, is 10.1% higher in September 2022 than it was in September 2021. That's a very big number. It's 5 times the Bank of England's 2% inflation target. But I think a lot of people will feel that in reality, the actual increase in the cost of living is much, much higher, particularly if you're spending lots of your income on food and fuel, like petrol, heating, and so on. Within the numbers, we've got the highest food and drink inflation, that's non-alcoholic drinks, since 1980. That's up at 14.5%, so that's higher than the average rate of inflation. And it all points to a cost of living crisis. We can talk about all this data, but real people and real companies are feeling the squeeze. You know, if you're trying to make ends meet, running a household, a busy family, or if you're running a small business, a restaurant or a laundrette or something like that, the cost of everything is going up. And it's hard to grow when prices are going up so quickly.
I wonder, are we making too much of the psychological element of back in double figures? The rise from August to September was 0.2%. Now, obviously, it's quite a high level, but it's margin of error stuff, really. This is potentially inflation staying where it was. A bad thing, but are we putting too much emphasis on this double-digit, single-digit dichotomy?
You're right, 0.9, 9.9 to 10.1, 2.2 percentage points, as you say, a fifth of 1%. It's not a big deal. But what's a really big deal is that it's still high and 5 times the target. And it's very hard to measure these things specifically. And I've often said, the ONS in general, it does a good job. It's one of the best statistical agencies in the world. But it's quite hard to calibrate that basket of goods and services that they do each year to reflect an incredibly diverse population in terms of how we spend our money. I think it's worth stressing too, before PMQs, and I know you'll be watching that closely, both of you, as we all will in the newsroom, a really key moment in British politics. It's not just political pantomime. This is, is the Prime Minister going to survive, frankly? If I was Keir Starmer, I would be putting the Prime Minister under huge pressure about this inflation number, because this is a September inflation number. And September inflation numbers are what are traditionally the number that we use, the benchmark we use to uprate benefits the following spring. So in April, at the beginning of what we call the next fiscal year, April to April. And if we're not going to uprate the basic state pension by 10.1%, which will cost tens of billions of pounds, then the government's breaking a manifesto commitment, its so-called triple lock. And since I last came on the show, Tom, I've been doing some sums.
Yes.
And if you look at that triple lock, you get an increase in the pension, by basic state pension, by either 2.5% or the increase in average earnings or the increase in the consumer price index, inflation, whichever is higher.
Yeah.
And if they don't do the CPI, the 10.1, then maybe they'll do average earnings, right? And
Which is what, 5%?
About 5.4%, including bonuses. If they do that, then that will mean the basic state pension recipient gets about £450 less per year
than they otherwise would have
if
done.
The triple lock was actually honoured, if you like. And if you're a pensioner and you're paying through the nose for energy and food, and there is a lot of people talk about the battle of the generations. Young people have a hard time and the baby boomers have got all their houses. There is still a lot of pensioner poverty in this country.
Yeah.
Indeed.
There will be people across the country.
Perhaps asset rich, but cash poor.
Potentially, and some of them just poor. Can't put their heating on. There will be ghastly, tragic fatalities because of high energy bills. And the optics, the political optics of not honouring that triple lock, however expensive it will be very, very difficult. And I'd suspect Labour soon will say, actually, we will honour the triple lock, because the political points to be scored are higher than the potential political downside of looking fiscally irresponsible.
Potentially that is something that will be happening at noon today, noticing Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, wouldn't commit to that this morning. Perhaps Sir Keir is saving it up for midday.
Potentially.
But Liam, I know you'll be watching that closely, as we all will, and as everyone at home can too, by staying with us on GB News. Noon today, the big flashpoint there.
I think Liam made a very strong point that this isn't necessarily an intergenerational conflict. Undoubtedly, there are a lot of challenges that young people have, but many of the older generations are suffering from this cost of living crisis too. So what is the reality of the cost of living crisis and the increases that we are having over the next few months? Our Yorkshire reporter, Anna Riley, is at a grocer's in Selby in North Yorkshire to find out more. Thank you for joining us, Anna. How difficult is inflation for small businesses that you were speaking to?
Good morning. Yes, well, I'm here at Cooper's Grocers. I'm joined by Connor Cooper. He's the owner here. And as we've heard, inflation up to 10%, but for food up to as much as 14%. Connor, how have you seen the price rise with fruit and veg here?
Well, over the past 6 months to a year, food prices have gradually gone up. There's no doubt about that. Now, a lot of factors are factored into that. You've got your fuel price for the transport, you've got the electricity price for the storage, definitely for the suppliers, that's a big one. And also the fuel price of sending out the supplies to the shops, that's definitely a big one. And, you know, just general inflation isn't helping. The exchange rate probably wouldn't help with buying the products abroad. And, you know, it is affecting all over the board, but one of the key things to remember is that we are moving into the winter season, so you have got your seasonal stuff that always affects it. So this time of year, your salad stuff and your fruit does start to trickle up a little bit, and that's due to, you know, it's no longer the season for growing salads, it's no longer the season where people eat salads. But you'll see other stuff probably start to come down as well, in line with the seasons.
And we've got some tomatoes and courgettes here. These are some of the higher priced items at the moment. Why is that?
So your tomatoes, obviously salad food, so they are going up, you know, in price this time of year anyway. But one of the major ones is these are Dutch. So they're going in the Netherlands in big greenhouses, and the way they heat these greenhouses is they pump them. Well, they heat them with gas, and of course their main supply of gas originally came from Russia. Of course, now they're paying a premium for that, so now that's now being passed on to us, all a knock-on effect. And then courgettes, these are coming from Spain. They've jumped up in price last week, slowly coming back down as supply routes open up again. But again, they were hit with the drought like we were, well, the lack of rain like we were, which has caused a slow crop. We even had a very small crop in the UK where the courgettes and marrows this year haven't done very well for a lot of people, and they've just been small and not even worth harvesting or even transporting, really.
And have you had to, you know, pass on these costs to your customers? What are they saying, and how are you coping in general?
Well, yes, we have had to pass on unfortunately, we have had to raise our prices to maintain the cost of buying it in. Like, we were selling these tomatoes at a price previously that would have just barely covered actually buying them in now. However, I do work on the premise of that when the price comes down, I will bring it down for my customers when I can. Unfortunately, at the minute the prices are going up, but they're not coming down in the speed where they used to do. Like, you'd have jumps here and there, but they're not. They're being kept up now by the rising prices everywhere else. And, you know, electricity, you know, I'm one of the lucky few. I signed a fixed deal this year before the prices went up, but I've heard plenty of businesses that are, you know, their bills are tripling in the space of a month, and they are struggling, and they will either be the ones who pay that price, or they have to pass on those prices to the customers, which, you know, then feeds into a negative loop of higher prices, less customers, less business, higher prices again.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us this morning, Connor. So that's Connor's take here at Cooper's Grocers in Selby on those increased food prices that we're hearing about this morning.
Well, thank you so much, Connor, and Anna Riley, our Yorkshire reporter, for bringing us that important report. Well, after the break, should teachers be allowed to go on strike? That's the question we're asking after this morning's news with Rosie.
A very good morning. It's 10:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Rising food prices have pushed inflation back to a 40-year high. ONS figures show inflation rose to 10.1% in September. That's up from 9.9% the previous month. Labour says the growing cost of living will bring more anxiety to families, but the government's promise to help and prioritise the most vulnerable. But the commitment to increase pensions in line with inflation remains in doubt after Downing Street confirmed the move's under review. Liz Truss is going to be quizzed over her leadership during Prime Minister's questions. She'll face the Labour leader for the first time since abandoning her entire economic strategy in the wake of the mini-budget turmoil. The Prime Minister's battling to convince Conservative MPs that she should remain in charge after a poll of party members showed 83% believe she's doing a bad job. Manchester United footballer Mason Greenwood has been granted bail. The 21-year-old is facing charges of attempted rape, assault and controlling and coercive behaviour. His release comes just 2 days after he was remanded in custody. All 3 charges relate to the same woman. A report into maternity failings at East Kent Hospital NHS Trust is due to be published later. It's expected to say that newborn babies died due to poor care spanning several years. The report findings are also set to show families were often ignored or had their concerns overlooked. More than 200 cases dating back to 2009 have been examined by an expert panel. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1274 and €1.1481 euros. The price of gold is £1,455.94 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 6,921 points.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, it's 10:38 and this is To The Point with me, Tom Harwood, and Inaya Lauren Iman here on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and indeed on the radio this morning too.
Indeed. Well, we're just going to go to some of your views very quickly because you've been getting in touch on many of the top subjects we've been talking about. For example, Liz Truss and so on. Well, Joanne tells us Truss needs to go now. Sunak or Hunt definitely not for Prime Minister. They would definitely lose the next election if Triple Lock gets ditched. The Tories are finished anyway. Sadly, there is no party to vote for Labour run by unions. No, thank you. I mean, the Triple Lock, the Tories' voter base is widely considered to be often pensioners and so on. So that would be a very big challenge for them politically if they go ahead with that.
Yes, although a very expensive policy. We'll get to some more of your views later, but for now, let's turn turn to Mark White, who's got some breaking news for us, as Just Stop Oil protesters are blocking yet another road. Mark, what's going on?
Tom, yeah, another day, another protest, and it's back on the A4. You remember yesterday outside Barron's Court in West London, the A4 completely blocked during rush hour for a couple of hours. Well, here they are now. This is near the Natural History Museum. One roadway, the police have been very prompt here, has already been cleared, and officers, these specialist protester removal teams are in there. The reason they're in there is because protesters have glued, or some of them at least, have super glued their hands to the roadway there. And what has to happen is these teams have to use solvents to dissolve that super glue and then get them up. Now you can see this gentleman here, he's doing what is now a familiar ritual, just lying non-compliant in police parlance, just ensuring that you need 3 or 4 officers to lift him to the side of the road, and then eventually he'll be put into the police van. So this is going a bit quicker than it did yesterday, but it just depends really on where the police resources are, how quickly they can respond with these removal teams, and then get the people off the main road so that the traffic in and out of this very busy arterial route down into central London can start flowing again. It's deeply, deeply frustrating for these motorists that are being held up for sometimes hours at a time, and we've noticed a marked change this week in what's happening here, with people coming out of their cars to remonstrate with the protesters. As you see, another one being loaded into the back of that van and not, well, now she's in the van, she seems to be sitting herself down, but she lost the use of her legs completely before that. That's a remarkable recovery from her. Other protesters at the side of the road here just being patted down and checked, because although they don't expect them to have any kind of dangerous weapons, they're not going to put them in a police van, take them to custody with the possibility that they could have any dangerous items on them. So they have to go through that procedure, and all this takes time. It's a process, and I was saying before that, you know, people are deeply, deeply frustrated, the travelling public who are being held up here, and we've noticed this week with motorists coming out of their vehicles, other members of the public, pedestrians walking by, actually remonstrating with the protesters, telling them that they are very selfish for what they're doing and that they are not actually helping their cause. The protesters themselves are completely unapologetic. They say we're in a climate emergency, and they are justified in taking this action. As I say, you know, that's their viewpoint. You get a different viewpoint from those that are being held up and inconvenienced sometimes for hours with what is going on here. So the process underway now, as you can see.
Yes, we're looking at some really fascinating images of just how gentle the police are being with, I presume, Tiffany or Tamara or Tarquin or whoever it is who's sitting down there. What can you tell us about the demographics of these protesters? Because I don't want to rush to judgment, but they do seem overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly middle class.
Yes and yes on both those points. What you have is a mix, really, of people who are generally tend to be probably professional types, retirees, and in amongst them some students as well, which tends to be the demographics of a lot of these protest groups. Now, in terms of you're talking about the way in which the police are interacting with these protesters, well, that always depends on what the police are met with. You know, if they are met with aggressive, violent protesters, then they will respond in kind to defend themselves and ensure that these people are dealt with and arrested. But when you've got protesters who are very peaceful but non-compliant, obviously not wanting to move, then the police aren't going to go and move in and start harming these individuals. They just want to remove them from the roadway to ensure that the traffic can flow again. The difficulty is, though, I'm seeing the same faces coming here day after day because it's a revolving door. in the process of dealing with these people, ungluing them, arresting them, taking them, processing them at a police station, giving them a court date perhaps at some time. But in the meantime, they're back out and they're doing exactly the same thing the next again day, which is why, of course, the Home Secretary wants to reintroduce legislation to Parliament to get tougher and to dangle over these protesters the threat of jail terms if they can get these injunctions through to stop these protests in key areas of London and elsewhere.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for bringing us that, and it does seem extraordinary because this is one extreme of protesting here in this country, and we're talking about the very extreme response of perhaps a threat of being behind bars at some point. Well, let's now turn to the other extreme, the justified protests that we're seeing around the world against very real injustice.
Well, Iranian athlete Elnaz Rakabi gained international attention on Sunday when she took part in a competition in South Korea without wearing a hijab, seemingly in defiance of her country's strict morality rules, which mandates women cover their hair. After this, it was reported that her friends and family were unable to contact her and were concerned for her whereabouts. On Tuesday, she posted on Instagram that she didn't wear a headscarf by mistake and it was not intentional.
Earlier this morning, she arrived back in Tehran, and there are concerns for her safety, indeed concerns that maybe she did not willingly post that Instagram post as well. Meanwhile, protests in Iran, sparked by the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini at the hands of morality police, continue across the country. And human rights groups estimate that around 200 people have been killed so far.
Well, joining us now to talk about this in more detail is Catherine Perez-Shakdam, Research Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, what do you make of what has unfolded with this athlete? I mean, she wasn't wearing her headscarf, as you mentioned in the introduction. Many people were seeing her as a hero in defiance of the morality police, but she has now posted saying that it was unintentional. But it's unclear whether that was actually from her own volition or maybe she was under some kind of duress.
I'm pretty sure that it was under duress. I mean, the regime has, this propensity to force people to apply, pressure, not just on the individuals, but their families as well. So it's very likely that her life was threatened, as well as that of her family. I think that her coming out without wearing the headscarf, which is mandatory in Iran, and could potentially, buy her jail time, or like what happened with Mahsa Amini, cause her death, by severe beating. I think it's quite clear. I mean, it was intentional. She was very brave in doing so. And thousands of women across Iran are doing the same very thing every single day. And it's impressive.
Yeah, I personally am just very concerned about the lack of Western vocal condemnation about what is going on. I mean, to me, it seems like quite a clear-cut moral issue. Many of these women are fighting for basic human dignity against a repressive, subjugating regime that barely recognises them as human beings. In that context, we have seen Western leaders comment and intervene in other things, but this one, there seems to be a level of equivocation.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? I think actually it goes beyond just, a feminist movement or even a revolution. I think it has to do with the fact that we need in Western capitals and in London to actually grasp the notion that Iran, number one, is, carrying this ideology which has breached into our borders. This is something that we're trying to discuss at the Henry Jackson Society quite vehemently. We believe that there's a threat to our national security by the very nature of the regime and the ideology underwriting it, which is basically geared towards, towards export. Iran is just a convenient outpost for the Islamic Republic. It's not limited to. And my fear is that because we have been so complacent in not condemning strongly enough and not asserting, stronger sanctions or actions against the Republic, it means that, they feel entitled to push against our tradition, our belief system, and the fact that we stand for human rights and religious freedom. This is not an attack on Islam. This is to say that women have a right to choose the manner of their dress. They also have the right to not practice, should they choose to. But unfortunately, in the Islamic Republic, it doesn't work this way. And they do practice hostage diplomacy whenever we push against them. And I think there's a fear in our Western capitals that should we say something or do something that may offend them, they will do something in retaliation, which they have done. they have arrested 20,000 people in Iran, among which dual nationals. And that means, Swedes and French and German and potentially Brits.
And it seems that Iran-made drones are also killing civilians in Ukraine. I wonder, looking at the scale of this protest movement that we've seen over the last few weeks, more so than something we've seen for decades, really, in Iran, could it actually lead to something material? Could it lead to regime change?
Yes, I do believe so. And I'm very glad that you bring this up, because by exporting the kamikaze drone to Russia, which are being used in Ukraine now, they literally entered our territory, Europe. So they're now operating. This is not an act of war per se, but this is an act of aggression against, against the West. And I'm worried that it's not going to be limited to. If you're looking now in Syria, Hezbollah, which is working with RSGC, is building runways for drones, those very drones, right at the border with Israel. Israel is a strategic ally of not only Britain, but also Western capitals. And that means that we're not looking after our partners' interests, which ultimately are our interests. Because what do we do when something terrible happens and we haven't been prepared? We haven't prepared against Russia in Ukraine. We're not preparing against the Islamic Republic. And unfortunately, because of the nature of the regime and the fact that thousands of outposts have, already in existence here, not just in the UK, but also, in the West, across, we have done nothing. So can we actually, sit here and say, well, we need to be careful? Maybe not. A defensive war, defending ourselves against the Islamic Republic, would cost more than to actually maybe think of another solution. And I'm not talking about regime changes and military interventionism. I'm talking about discussing with our partners in the region solutions which would benefit our national security and prevent an escalation further.
Well, thank you so much. And please come on the show again, because this was a very fascinating and important conversation. Catherine Perez-Shakdam, Research Fellow at the Henry Jackson Society. I think it is very important to reiterate that the Islamic Republic does not necessarily represent Iranian people. I saw a poll that there is actually a very high level of no religion, irreligiosity in Iran. And so that regime actually has a very tight control, despite the fact that they are hardly representative of Iranian people.
It's it's such a fascinating movement, one to keep an eye on as well. It would be a really remarkable thing were they to have some success in dislodging their executive. But moving back to this country, head teachers in England could be about to go on strike. The NAHT, that's the trade union that represents head teachers, has balloted its members for the first time in its 125-year history.
Yes, well, how significant is this threat of strike action by head teachers? Well, joining us now to discuss this is Dr. Tony Breslin, a former teacher, chief examiner and author of Lessons from Lockdown and Bubble Schools and the Long Road from Lockdown. Thank you, which is out in December. So thank you for joining us. I mean, many ordinary people will be thinking that a lot of children, a lot of young people experience a significant disruption to their education over the last few years because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and therefore a suggestion when we need a lot more catch-up, we need a lot more attention to education, of head teachers and teachers going on strike seems a bit wrong.
Well, look, I think the clue was in many ways in your introduction. This is the first time the National Association of Head Teachers has balloted their teachers on industrial action. And we have to ask the question, how did we get to this place? I need to declare a bias here. I'm a chair of governors. I'm married to a head teacher. As a chair of governors, I work with another head teacher. I've been to school this morning. Trust me, these people did not come into this profession to strike. No teacher, no head, no TA. They didn't come in for this. And we have to ask the question, why are they now feeling this way? Because these are the people who, during lockdown, there's a myth that schools closed. They remained open throughout for our most vulnerable children, and the children are key workers. And it was heads in particular who really made sure that happened. And I think actually what we're losing a sense of is how draining and exhausting that commitment over the last 2.5 years has been.
What about the timing? What about the timing? We are in a cost of living crisis, and you may point to that as one of the reasons the teachers want a pay rise. But we don't even know potentially who our next Prime Minister is going to be over the next few weeks. So does it seem that the timing is not really the best time?
Well, I'm never sure that there is a best time. I mean, the truth of the matter is, whatever we do hold teachers to account for. We can't hold them to account for events in government at the moment. There is no good time for teachers to take industrial action. And if teachers end up taking industrial action, that is a defeat for all of us. And we need to ask, let's not presume that this vote will go one way or the other. But we need to ask, how is it that organisations like the National Association of Head Teachers, that nurses organisations, that those representing barristers and so on are suddenly, these are not typical striking groups. If any head teachers do take this action, or if lots of them do, they will do so with the heaviest of hearts. But you're right, we need to be getting our education system back and running. I've spent the last 2 years studying and interviewing, in particular, head teachers and teachers about the experience of lockdown. You're absolutely right. We need to be getting our schooling back on course. But the reality is we need to ask, why has this incredibly dedicated group of professionals even thought about coming to this conclusion at this time? We need to address that. Head teachers are leaving the profession in their droves. They're leaving 5 and 10 years early, taking early retirement, because they are on their knees with exhaustion, trying to run an under-resourced system. We've got problems at the other end recruiting teaching assistants and teachers into the profession. And we need to ask, what is going on here?
Well, thank you so much. I mean, I am still worried about the exacerbating educational inequality from the pandemic, but you raised some very fair points. So thank you, Dr. Tony Breslin, former teacher and author. Thank you very much.
Well, the news has been a bit grim in recent days, so let's try and end the hour away from the overly serious news and see what the latest headlines are in the world of entertainment.
Yes, well, we're delighted to be joined in the studio by Julie and Trainer, Showbiz journalist. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, let's start with James Corden. Inform us what has been going on with him.
Yes, that's right. Well, James found himself yesterday banned from a very swanky, high-end New York restaurant. The owner named and shamed him publicly on Instagram and said that in all his 25 years of owning the restaurant, he was the most abusive customer he had ever had.
Wow. You don't expect that from sort of the bubbly personality. Certainly someone who seems to be loved as a bit of a cheeky British chappie over in the States, perhaps less loved in this country.
I know. And not only that, but also he presents the Late Late Show, obviously, in America, and he's stepping down from his role in that next year.
Right.
So,
I mean, a bit bitter.
I wouldn't say bitter, well, but I just think this couldn't have came at a worse time, really.
And Graham Norton, he's left Twitter after he said that, cancel culture was just accountability.
Exactly, yes. He's found himself now swept up in a row with J.K. Rowling fans. And some have said that he's been bullied off Twitter because of these comments that he made at a literature festival last week. But yesterday, people seem to be very much in favour of Graham with the hashtag I stand by Graham Norton trending. So he's yet to re-emerge on Twitter, but I say he will be back.
I suppose it's interesting there, because whilst he did say that about cancel culture, he also said, I don't want to wade into this debate. I don't want to be...
You can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways.
I know, so...
And what about the actor Ezra Miller? I mean, he's been in so much controversy over the last few months, and he seems to have potentially got involved, or maybe, could face up to a significant time in prison.
Gosh, I know. Well, another thing as well that has caught my eye though is Meghan Markle. She has had her latest podcast episode featuring Paris Hilton. So that has been making massive headlines because in it she speaks about her time as a deal or no deal briefcase girl. So that's been really interesting. I don't know if you have listened to the podcast episode or not.
Read a bit about it.
Can't say I've listened to a Meghan Markle podcast, but this is interesting. Going back into her sort of pre-royal royal history.
Exactly. And I mean, not only that, but also Chrissy Teigen. She used to be one of these briefcase girls as well.
All right.
So I find it fascinating, yeah. And she spoke about her time on that and saying that they were, what she felt she was objectified. And they were given like vouchers for spray tans and, you know, this sort of thing. And she says she ended up stepping down from her role because she felt it wasn't worth the money in the end for how it made her feel.
Well,
so
it'd be nice to hear Meghan talk about the future in a positive way, not so negative about the past.
Or perhaps not nice to hear her at all. Anyway, moving on, we do have to get to a break now, but yes, no, really interesting stuff in Showbiz as well. It's so much nice, so nice to have some of that lighter stuff in this dreary time of news.
Well, that was Julianne Taylor. Thank you so much. Well, we have more coming up in the next hour. Keep your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk, just after the break.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Flower Iman and Tom Harwood on your TV, radio and online. We are with you until midday with a show jam-packed of today's biggest stories, lots of discussion, expert guests and our opinions as well as yours.
So make sure you get in touch with your views. As usual, we will be getting to some of them. We haven't been getting to as many as we'd like, but we will be getting to those throughout the show. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the address to write to. But first, here are the headlines.
A very good morning. It's just 1 minute past 11. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date today on GB News. Now, rising food prices have pushed inflation back to a 40-year high. The ONS figures show inflation rose to 10.1% in September. That's up from 9.9% the previous month. Well, the Labour Party says the growing cost of living will bring more anxiety to families, but the government's promised to prioritise help for the most vulnerable. The commitment, though, to increase pensions in line with inflation remains in doubt after Downing Street confirmed the move is now under review. The Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, refused to confirm if the party will keep the pension triple lock.
No, that will be deeply frustrating for the people that you've been talking to who are looking at those inflation figures, they are looking at those interest rate rises, and they are worried about them. And we completely get that, and we want to give them certainty as soon as we can. But it wouldn't be right for me to, as I say, speculate about what the Chancellor might be saying next week.
Well, Liz Truss is preparing to be quizzed over her leadership during Prime Minister's questions. She's going to face the Labour leader for the first time since she abandoned most of her economic strategy in the wake of the turmoil after the mini-budget. The Prime Minister's battling to convince Conservative MPs that she should remain in charge after a poll of party members showed 83% believe she's doing a bad job. The Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, told GB News the Conservatives lack stability.
What you're seeing at the minute is the government, frankly, put up a new idea every day, testing the water a little bit. You know, honestly, when inflation's the way it is, when mortgages are going up, when business investment's going down, I think that's incredibly bad because it's putting more anxiety out there when, frankly, the job of the government right now should be putting some calm and stability in place. But, of course, they are themselves the cause of this crisis because of that mini-budget 3 weeks ago.
The Manchester United footballer Mason Greenwood has been granted bail. The 21-year-old's facing charges of attempted rape, assault and controlling and coercive behaviour. His release comes just 2 days after he was remanded in custody. All 3 charges relate to the same woman. A report into maternity failings at East Kent Hospital's NHS Trust is due to be published later. It's expected to say that newborn babies died due to poor care spanning several years. The report findings are also set to show families were often ignored or had their concerns overlooked. More than 200 cases dating back to 2009 have been examined by an expert panel. MPs say NHS understaffing is creating a serious risk to patient safety in England. It's a new report from the Health and Social Care Committee that shows a shortfall of 12,000 doctors and more than 50,000 nurses and midwives. It's after a letter was sent to staff by health leaders setting out resilience plans as the NHS prepares for one of its toughest winters in its history. Well, retired midwife Neymar Tamarin Yates told us recruitment and retention is a growing problem.
They are all at the situation in life and the place in their lives that they can't afford not to be there. But we have got a lot of newly qualified staff, and that is where the problem with retention comes. When I look at the unit that I used to work in, how many women we were delivering, how many babies we had, and how many staff we had per shift. Yeah. Now we are still running with the same number of staff, but our delivery rate has actually nearly doubled.
The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is in Washington to discuss security concerns, including Russia's war with Ukraine. It comes after Moscow said the 4 regions it illegally annexed now fall under the protection of Russia's nuclear arsenal. Ukraine has accused Russia of using Iranian drones during attacks in recent weeks, which both countries have denied. President Volodymyr Zelensky says the reliance on Tehran is a sign of how much the Kremlin is struggling.
The very fact that Russia has sought help from Iran is an admission by the Kremlin that it's bankrupt in military and political terms. Strategically, it'll not help them in the least. It'll simply show the world that once again Russia is headed for defeat and is trying to drag yet another one of its accomplices into this terror.
Criminal justice experts say a safety rating is needed on social media to protect children from online harm. Well, the report suggests that a 5-star measuring system could indicate how safe a site is for young people. Quest Advisory also recommends age verification through a national alert system to notify parents of any threats online. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it develops. Now, let's return to Tom and Anaya.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Inaya Flaren-Iman as well on your TV, radio and indeed online. We've got a great show lined up for you in this final hour, so here's what's coming up.
Yes, well, the rate of inflation has risen to 10.1% as the cost of living crisis continues to bite. This comes as Prime Minister Liz Truss faces pressure not to abandon the pension's triple lock guarantee. We'll be speaking to a pollster about her popularity, and we'll be asking, is PMQs today a crucial test of her leadership?
Just 2 Just Stop Oil protesters who climbed the top of the Queen Elizabeth II Bridge, the Dartford crossing to you and me, have been brought down and arrested. Finally! Is this disruption ever justified? And how did 2 people close a major road for so long? Let us know what you think.
And also, China is apparently luring former RAF pilots with big sums of money to advise their military against Western militaries. How big a threat is China to Western security?
We've got all that coming up and so much more across the programme. And you can get in touch too with your views as usual. gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Now Liz Truss is facing cabinet unrest over her plans for public spending cuts and is expected to appear at PMQs for the first time since her tax U-turns later today.
So will Liz Truss be able to turn around her falling popularity? She's got a popularity rating of -70, according to just one opinion poll, lower even than Boris Johnson before he was removed from office.
Well, let's now go to Downing Street, where our political reporter, Catherine Forster, has the latest. Obviously, thank you again for joining us. I mean, obviously, the Prime Minister, a lot will be riding on this PMQs now. I mean, do you think there's anything she can do to turn around her popularity?
I think she really has a mountain to climb now. It feels very, very febrile. Even at Downing Street today, I've been here since 7 o'clock. Now there's somebody with a megaphone. I hope you can hear me all right. A huge number of press, foreign press as well. A lot of coming and going, and the car waiting to take Liz Truss to Prime Minister's questions. A few developments in the last hour or so. Yet another Conservative MP, this one Steve Double MP for St Austell and Newquay, has come out saying that the Prime Minister should go. That brings the number of MPs who've publicly called for her to go to 6. Also, some reports that the chair of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady, has now had enough letters to breach the normal threshold at which a confidence vote would be held, but he is allegedly holding out for half the total number of Conservative MPs to send in letters before he would act. But also, just in the last few minutes, Labour are trying to take control of the order paper by bringing a vote on fracking at 7 p.m. tonight. Now, the Deputy Chief Whip has said that this is effectively a vote of confidence and has put all Conservative MPs on a 3-line whip. Now, fracking is a very divisive issue, and many Conservative MPs opposed to it. So an extremely difficult day. And although things did feel a little bit calmer for Liz Truss, it feels now like things are ramping up again. And obviously today she's going to want to paint a picture of stability. The words at the Tory party conference just a couple of weeks ago about disruption are well and truly gone. Now there's we need stability, we need to come together. Well, let's see what happens.
Well, Catherine, thank you for that, and we'll see if we can jump to you. I can see the Prime Minister's car has driven up right behind you by that front door. Do let us know when that door opens and the Prime Minister steps out. We'll see if we can jump to you and see what everyone's going to shout at her in probably around 15 or 20 minutes' time. Catherine, thank you.
Thank you. Well, joining us now is Chris Hopkins, Political Research Director at Cervantes Comrest. Thank you for joining us. I mean, a lot of the polls are quite worrying. Her popularity, Prime Minister Liz Truss, is lower now than what Boris Johnson was when he left office. What do you make of the polls and what the public think about her popularity?
Yeah, I mean, Liz Truss's job when she came into power was to right the wrongs of what Boris Johnson had done. Boris Johnson, frankly, had made the Conservative brand pretty troublesome. The public were not very happy with neither the party nor the leadership, and it was Liz Truss's job to try and get that back. And she's done the opposite. She hasn't even stabilised it. She's made it considerably worse. As you say, her popularity among most pollsters, including ourselves, is lower than Boris Johnson, lower than many previous prime ministers, and lower even than some very unpopular leaders of the opposition, such as Jeremy Corbyn. It's very, very hard to see any real route back for Liz Truss at the moment. And ultimately, the voting intention polls are showing that the Conservatives will be wiped out if there was an election tomorrow, maybe even into third place behind the SNP, with the SNP as Her Majesty's official opposition. These really are unprecedented and troubling times for the Conservative Party.
Now, I'm old enough to remember about 4 weeks ago when the Prime Minister said, "I'm willing to be unpopular," referencing the way that Margaret Thatcher was behind in the polls years before an election and then got more popular as the election got closer. Is there a school of thought here that it's possible to be behind in the polls now and then in 2 years climb some of that back?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right in a sense, Tom, in the sense that time is still on her side, but still she hasn't had as much time to get to know the electorate in the same way that Keir Starmer has. And even in the last month that she's been Prime Minister, and we've seen her popularity just completely fall away. Yes, she can get that back, but sometimes the quicker you fall, the harder it is, ultimately to get back. And Boris Johnson's decline was quite long and protracted. Liz Truss has been very, very instantaneous. I think the public have made their mind up on her very, very quickly, and that does make it all the more difficult for her to come back from this. You reference Margaret Thatcher. Yes, she did come back. She was not doing all that well in opinion polls in the very early 1980s. But this is a 30, 33, 36 point Labour lead at the moment that we're seeing. This is the Conservatives having seats. The number of seats that they have is likely to be in the tens, not even making three figures, according to some seat projections. This really is unprecedented, and ultimately she would have to get back to a Labour lead of 8 or 9 points. So sort of winning back by decreasing the lead by over 20 points at the moment to even begin to maybe think about Labour not having a majority. Labour would still probably be the largest party, and they've got more natural coalition partners within the House of Commons. It really is unprecedented. We're not talking about a Labour government. We're talking about a Conservative wipeout.
Yeah, and on that point about the Labour Party, because obviously, these polls are showing the unpopularity of Liz Truss, but how popular is Keir Starmer himself? I mean, he's not necessarily, someone as popular as Boris Johnson at the height. He's not known to be very lovable in that same way. So is he really popular, or is it just that he's obviously way less unpopular than Liz Truss?
I mean, he is ultimately the latter there, way less unpopular than Liz Truss. It's not to say that he isn't popular. I think he's just relatively bland. I don't think he's got that, he doesn't have that magic spark that perhaps Boris Johnson once had with the electorate, but neither is he anywhere near as unpopular as Liz Truss. And ultimately, this Labour lead at the moment that I'm sure many in the Labour Party are getting very excited about is not from the Labour Party's doing. This is purely from the Conservative Party's doing. It's purely that Labour inheriting this lead almost by default. Now that does give us pollsters and I'm sure many in the media a little bit of a pause for thought. Ultimately, the lead is exacerbated slightly by many Conservative 2019 voters saying that they're currently undecided. But we are seeing more and more direct switches to the Labour Party. We are seeing that Keir Starmer is streets ahead of Liz Truss in terms of favourability, in terms of approval, and in terms of the best Prime Minister metric. And therefore, it does tend to be those indicators that do often, instead of the voting intention, lead you to conclude that the Labour Party are very much on course for a majority at the next election.
Oh, thanks, Chris Hopkins, Political Research Director at Cervantes Comres. I mean, it is interesting, Tom, the point that you made about Thatcher, but at the end of the day, she won a majority. She had that popularity and constituency, and the public knew her. I think one of the challenges with Liz Truss is that she may well have been one of the least known incoming prime ministers.
And her authority within the party isn't off the back of winning an election. She can't say, hang on, we were elected to do this on this mandate.
Exactly.
Although I suppose one of the things that irritates me about a lot of the commentary is when people talk about, for example, the pensions triple lock, and they say, well, it was in the manifesto to keep it, how dare you go back on that? Well, it was also in the manifesto that corporation tax was at 19%. The manifesto criticised the Labour Party's plans to raise corporation tax to 26%. The manifesto said that they'd keep national insurance at the level it was. It would cut national insurance in some areas. The manifesto was a low-tax manifesto, and over the last 2.5 years, we've had the highest taxing government that we've had in 70 years.
You have to recognise, Tom, obviously, the unique situation with the pandemic, which meant that in a lot of ways the rule book had to be shifted and therefore the political response had to be shifted.
But why then is it legitimate to criticise the government for going back on the manifesto on the spending measures, but not on taxing measures?
Well, I think that is a fair point, although the corporation tax is generally in line with other G7 countries. So
it's going to be higher than France. France is not known to be a particularly low taxing country. But we will get to some of your views on
We
this.
will.
A lot of people have been writing in about what they think about Boris, which is particularly interesting. Just very briefly, Stuart says, why does anyone want Boris to return as PM? However, on the other hand, where was that there? Someone else has written in saying they really do want Boris to return. We'll get to those in a bit. But after the break, 2 Just Stop Oil protesters climbed the Elizabeth II Bridge, of course. Well, they have now been brought down and arrested. We'll be joined by one of their spokespeople. But before that, a look at this morning's weather.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A bit of a cloudier day today for most. Some outbreaks of quite heavy rain in the west, and it's also in parts of the west where we've got some very gusty winds. Across the southwest, that's where we've got this area of low pressure that's been around for a while, and weather fronts throwing northwards from that weather system are bringing the heavy outbreaks of rain, some rumbles of thunder crossing Wales into parts of Northern Ireland. So quite a soggy scene here for much of the afternoon. Some of those heavy showers getting into parts of the West Midlands and maybe later today into northwest England. 1 or 2 more showers could come into the far southwest, but here generally turning drier. Some brighter spells across the southeast and particularly northwest Scotland with some sunshine. And it's pretty mild in the south, but it's also gusty, especially for southwest England and West Wales. Some very lively gusts of wind through this afternoon and this evening. During this evening, the rain showers will spread more across northern England and eventually overnight into parts of Scotland. Still some heavy bursts of rain likely. The odd rumble of thunder is possible. Further south, mostly dry, quite a lot of cloud around, a bit misty and murky in a few spots, and very mild. Temperatures staying in double figures for the majority. Thursday should be drier for Wales and Northern Ireland, but further east there will be some rain coming in. Some uncertainty about the timing of this rain, but it could make for quite a wet day for parts of southeast England and East Anglia, spreading up towards Yorkshire. Outbreaks of rain too continuing across eastern Scotland. So today most of the rain's in the west. Tomorrow most of the rain is in the east, but all the while it's going to be pretty mild, especially if we do see any sunshine. And tomorrow the winds will be lighter as well. Further outbreaks of rain perhaps coming up the eastern side as we go through Thursday evening, and then down to the southwest. Another band of rain arriving in between, turning largely dry with some clear spells. But those bands of showers move back across the country on Friday. The weather remaining pretty mixed into the weekend, but always pretty mild.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 11:23. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Florin-Eman and Tom Harwood. We're just going to go to some of your views, as there's been lots of subjects we've been discussing: the teachers' potential strike, Just Stop Oil, and also Liz Truss. Well, Caroline says, I certainly do not want Boris to return, as we would be back to fervent discussions about the type of cake served at his birthday party. We were just saying in the break that it really does put into perspective the reasons or the context why he left, when in that sense, is it that bad?
We spent 6 months debating whether or not a cake was served and what level of alcohol is one beer okay, or does 2 make it a party? I mean, my gosh, what context? Although on the Liz Truss premiership, George asks, if Liz Truss stands down, who on earth would want the job at the moment? Who would succeed her? The party members rejected Rishi Sunak, as I would have done, so will they be given another vote on either him or whoever came third in the MP's vote, George asks. Well, Penny Mordaunt came third, and there was a little suggestion that she might there. We're just looking at the cars which are shuffling around in front of number 10 there. We're expecting Liz Truss to step out of her shiny front door in the next few minutes, so we'll keep you abreast of that. Oh, the door is opening. I wonder if that is the Prime Minister. It's not the Prime Minister. It's someone wearing very, very informal clothing, actually, a hoodie, which is taking us back to the Dominic Cummings days. But yes, we'll keep an eye on that for you. In the meantime, there's some more of you who have written in. And Anne comments, I think whoever was in government over the last few years would have had the same problems as now. If Labour were in, the cost of living and taxes would be higher too, and they would have increased pay for most of the public sector, which taxes pay for. So there would be budgetary issues there as well, Anne says.
Interestingly, Linda has a somewhat different take. She says Liz Truss should sue the Tories for bullying misogynistic men. In my view, trying to grow the economy should be admired. Well, she has apparently been briefing some people that this is related to misogyny, but it would be strange to argue that, given that the Tory party have had 3 female Prime Ministers when the Labour Party hasn't even had a leader of the Labour Party. Just quickly on some of the other subjects, interestingly, on the teacher strike, Clive says the strike is part of a general strike being organised by the TUC as part of a plan to destroy any Tory leader in government and get the woke left into power. So he thinks that this is really a different agenda to the issues that they're raising in terms of pay and conditions. Interesting.
Interesting indeed. And Tina says, surely these teachers won't think of striking when they themselves have been fortunate enough to get an education that's enabled them to have a career. She's saying, think of those children whose education has already been destroyed by COVID. I think that's a very pertinent point there. Well, lots of views still coming in. We'll get to some more before the end of the show, but and also we'll keep half an eye on when Liz Truss is leaving Downing Street. But we'll park that for the meantime, because 2 Just Stop Oil protesters have been brought down and arrested after they climbed to the top of the Queen Elizabeth II bridge, which links Kent with Essex, the Dartford crossing, as it's known.
Well, the bridge was closed for 2 days as the group demands the government, quote, halt all new oil and gas licences and consents, and has promised disruption throughout the month of October. Well, joining us now is one of the Just Stop Oil spokespeople, Oliver Clegg. Thank you for joining us on the programme. My first question to you is that, isn't there something deeply anti-democratic and authoritarian about what you are doing? You are disrupting ordinary people's lives. You are targeting normal working class people trying to get on in their life. Don't you have the wrong target?
Yeah, good morning. So absolutely not. This is part of democracy. Protest is democracy. And when we have a government that was elected by 0.12% of the population, and they're bringing about policies that are going to lead to the destruction
who elected
by
you?
generation.
Who elected
then
you?
It is cowardice to do nothing.
But
it's
Oliver,
not
who-
democratic, it's just cowardly.
Who elected you? Because you're obviously criticising the political system, but no one voted for you and your policies and disruption.
No, but we're a direct action protest group.
Oliver, I want to take a slightly different tack here. Lots of people will have sympathy for protest movements around the world, many of them peaceful, many of them non-violent. Do you think that Just Stop Oil is a peaceful and non-violent protest group?
Absolutely, absolutely. Everything that we do is peaceful and completely non-violent, and we're trained in it.
Is it peaceful and non-violent to smash windows or to deface artwork?
Well, yeah, of course. No one has ever been
peaceful to
harmed
smash
by
windows.
either of those
Really?
actions. And in fact, the paintings weren't even damaged. They're behind glass.
Is it peaceful to smash windows?
Yes. No one was harmed.
So it's a peaceful act to damage property. It's a peaceful act as long as no individual was harmed. By that logic, blowing up a bridge if no one was on it would be a peaceful act.
You're being facetious and going into these ludicrous hypothetical situations. No, we haven't blown up a bridge, and no,
but Oliver, it's an important point.
Right at this very minute, Tom, there are 30 million people in Pakistan who have been made homeless by catastrophic flooding. Just last summer, there was 40-degree heat in the UK. That is unheard of, and 1,600 people died. 60 families lost their homes. Those aren't hypotheticals. That's not being facetious. That is the world that we are living in.
Yes, there are some real problems with the climate around the world. I would note that fewer people are dying of extreme weather events than ever before, partly because we've got technological progress, and even though climate conditions are becoming more challenging, we do have the means to combat those, perhaps because we've become richer, perhaps because we're entering this balance between how we keep the lights on and how we care for our planet. But I do want to ask on this bridge question, because Oliver, you said that as long as no one is hurt, this is a non-violent protest. Does that mean that any damage to any infrastructure is non-violent?
Yeah, Tom, have you heard of a dictionary? Non-violent. We are not hurting anybody.
So violence, in your view, is only to do with people. You don't think that you can be violent towards something that isn't a person. You don't think that blowing up a bridge would not be violent.
Again, with that ludicrous hypothetical, we have not blown up a bridge. What you're talking about is throwing tomato soup at a painting, which, by the way, was behind glass. And you're trying to argue that throwing tomato soup is violent? Throwing tomato soup at a painting is violent? Do you hear yourself?
Oliver, your group has smashed windows of banks. Your group has smashed windows of companies. Indeed, your group has thrown paint over historic buildings as well. I wonder, if the Van Gogh painting was not behind glass, would it be legitimate to damage it?
I don't know. And again, you're at it with these ludicrous hypotheticals. That's just not what we did. The reality of the situation is the painting was behind glass and 60 families did lose their entire homes during 40-degree heat that never would have happened.
This is an interesting point because we are moving towards more and more extreme tactics. The environmental protests of 10 years ago were nowhere near as extreme as this. And I suppose the worry for some people is if you genuinely believe that there are going to be billions of people dying through climate change, which is what some of the spokespeople I've spoken to before from organisations like yours believe. If you genuinely believe we're heading towards an extinction level event, surely your protests are going to get ever more violent, because that, in your view, would be entirely justifiable.
Our actions are never going to be violent. We are committed to non-violence. But yeah, you're saying that our protests are getting more extreme, but that is just a symptom of the fact that the climate crisis is getting more and more extreme. I mean, in your lifetime, did you ever see 40 degrees in the UK? It's never happened before. It's unheard of. And that's just in 2022. Imagine what it's going to be like next year. Imagine what it's going to be like by 2050. We do not have time to wait here. I'm 19 years old. Just imagine what the rest of my life is going to be like.
Well, interestingly, we have the Collins Dictionary definition of non-violent, which actually says methods of bringing about change do not involve hurting people or causing damage. So according to the dictionary definition that you brought up, actually it can include violence against things that are not necessarily people. So do you acknowledge now that your organisation, your group, is not a non-violent group?
That's just pedantic. So now you're saying that throwing soup is an act of violence. Oh, so we should be condemned for violence, for throwing soup at a painting.
Hang on, Oliver. Let's park the soup. Smashing a window. That's really easy for us to understand. Criminal damage. To me, that sounds like a violent thing, but to you, that's a non-violent thing.
Yeah. No, nobody's harmed.
Okay.
This is just...
Right, we're going around in circles, but that is a fascinating point. Smashing a window to you, I would put smashing a window in the same box as slashing a tyre or breaking a vase, or I don't know. That seems like it's violent to me. But Oliver, clearly it doesn't to you. But we appreciate you coming on and putting your case passionately to us. Oliver Clegg, we assume no relation to the former Deputy Prime Minister, but thank you for your time.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. He talks about, people dying from overheating. Actually, the policies that they advocate for will basically cause many people to be freezing, and many people do die from freezing temperatures in this country in the winter. Well, after the break, every year, the police recover millions of pounds back from criminals. The money involved is reinvested into local communities. We'll be seeing that in action after a look at the morning headline.
A very good morning. It's 11:34. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date here on GB News. Now, rising food prices have pushed inflation to a 40-year high. ONS figures show inflation rose to 10.1% in September. That's up from 9.9% the previous month. Labour says the growing cost of living will bring more anxiety to families. The government has promised to prioritise help for the most vulnerable. But the commitment to increase pensions in line with inflation now remains in doubt after Downing Street confirmed the move is under review. Well, Liz Truss is preparing to be quizzed over her leadership during Prime Minister's questions. She'll face the Labour leader for the first time since abandoning her entire economic strategy in the wake of the mini-budget turmoil. The Prime Minister is battling to convince Conservative MPs that she should remain in charge after a poll of party members showed 83% believe she's doing a bad job. We'll bring you Prime Minister's questions here live on GB News. Manchester United footballer Mason Greenwood has been granted bail. The 21-year-old's facing charges of attempted rape, assault and controlling and coercive behaviour. His release comes just 2 days after he was remanded in custody. All 3 charges relate to the same woman. A report into maternity failings at East Kent Hospital NHS Trust is due to be published later. It's expected to say newborn babies died due to poor care spanning several years. The report findings are also set to show families were often ignored or had their concerns overlooked. More than 200 cases dating back to 2009 have been examined by an expert panel. We're on your TV, we're online and on your DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1274 and €1.1491. The price of gold is £1,455.01 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 6,942 points.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around with all the biggest topics and guests. You will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps. on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Well, good morning. It's 11:38, and this is To The Point with me, Tom Harwood, and Inaya Falarin Iman here on GB News. We're live on your TV, online, and on your radio this morning. Now, we're just looking at the front door of Downing Street, number 10 Downing Street, I should say, as we wait for the Prime Minister to leave. It's only around 20 minutes until she has to be up on her feet behind that dispatch box in the House of Commons, so she's leaving it a little bit late. But as soon as she does leave, we will show you that. And if she responds to any of the inevitable shouts that she gets from the assembled lobby hacks waiting opposite. Oh, am I speaking at just the right time? Yes, I am. Oh. There she is, the Prime Minister Liz Truss, walking with a smile on her face towards her government car. We'll be following her car, making the short journey down to Downing Street, there with an advisor in the back as well. I do wonder what people are going to be shouting. Can we hear any of the audio from the street, I wonder? We'll see if we can get that for you, although that might well be over now that
she has got a brave face there indeed. No doubt that she'll be very nervous deep down in terms of this big moment as to whether she survives.
Certainly, and she's going in a different way than usual as well. This is going through the sort of Foreign Office exit, not the main gate of Downing Street, but the gate that's sort of halfway along. I wonder if this is to give some protesters the slip and to avoid the inevitable cries of Mr. Stop Brexit Steve Bray, who usually stands outside Downing Street shouting, screaming and playing an awful lot of not very tuneful music. So there we go, Liz Truss taking a slightly different route to Westminster today. Of course, she will be standing behind that dispatch box from midday, so she's got 20 minutes to get herself prepared. She'll have been prepping all morning with some of her most senior advisors. No doubt from some pretty difficult questioning from Sir Keir Starmer. We're expecting the pensions triple lock to come up. We're expecting her position as Prime Minister to come up. Who does Keir Starmer address his questions to? The Prime Minister or Jeremy Hunt, who many people say is the Prime Minister now?
You know, that is an important question. And I mean, on Times Radio, Lisa Nandy didn't commit with regards to the triple lock as well. So whether or not Labour are going to have an adequate response to that question also remains to be seen. But we will be bringing you all of that in a matter of minutes.
But for now, we've had some viewer comments as well. One comments that I don't believe the numbers of Conservative members who want Liz Truss to leave. Oh, here we can see just some protesters there. They're closing the road ahead of Liz Truss's arrival. Here's her motorcade. It's a very short journey, of course. Oh, blimey, that was a bicyclist who almost got knocked over by the police there. Crikey. But here we go. They are driving in through Carriage. And here we are. So that's the Prime Minister, who will be on her feet in less than 20 minutes now. We'll go to PMQs, as it's known, Prime Minister's questions, as soon as that begins.
Well, in our final story, bringing it more international, let's say, well, China is reported to have recruited dozens of former British military pilots to teach the Chinese armed forces how to defeat Western aircrafts in a threat to UK interests.
Well, the Ministry of Defence's Defence Intelligence Service issued a threat alert yesterday to warn that serving and former military personnel against such approaches.
Yes, but Beijing is trying to hire more military pilots and other specialists from across the RAF, the Royal Navy and the British Army. So what threat does this pose to the West? Well, joining us now is Benedict Rogers, Chief Executive and co-founder of Hong Kong Watch. I mean, what is your reaction to this news? Many voters and ordinary people will be alarmed to find out that China are recruiting people that we've trained from our own country in order to potentially harm the UK.
Absolutely. It's completely extraordinary. When I saw the news, and I've seen a lot of extraordinary news over the recent years in relation to China, but this truly was ridiculous. And it comes only a matter of days after the government itself has declared China as a threat, a hostile state. So to have our own pilots training the Chinese military is just bizarre. I'm reassured to see the government is looking to change the law to that was reported today, but it's a little bit late.
But of course, the reason why China is looking to recruit so many British airmen and indeed members of the other armed services as well is surely to understand Western technology, surely to understand how to combat Western technology. Are they preparing for war?
Well, you're absolutely right that that's the reason that they're doing this. And I think it does suggest that they are increasing their preparations for the potential for war. And obviously the most likely source of conflict is going to be Taiwan. So yes, I think the threats to Taiwan have clearly been rising for some time, and this is another indication that China is preparing for this.
We've heard the United States, Joe Biden, say that the US may well be prepared to militarily intervene were China to encroach upon the sovereignty of Taiwan. What does that imply for where Britain would be? And frankly, do you believe the United States government?
I think I do believe the United States, and I certainly hope that they are taking this very seriously. I think the entire free world needs to stand with Taiwan, because if Taiwan were invaded by China, first of all, that would be the end of one of Asia's most vibrant democracies. But secondly, it would also put into Chinese control the manufacturing of most of the world's semiconductors that power all our technology, all our mobile phones, computers, and so on. So those are two very good reasons to prevent that happening. And I think it's absolutely right that the US should be sending a very clear and strong warning of what it will do in that situation. To answer your question about where Britain should stand, clearly as the US's closest ally and as a key member of NATO, we would have to be involved. Whether we're involved militarily is a different question, but we'd have to be involved with economic sanctions, with diplomatic pressure, and with full support for the US.
But also, Benedict, I mean, your organisation, Hong Kong Watch, it focuses on human rights and the rule of law. We were just reporting a couple of days ago how a Hong Kong protester was dragged into a Manchester Chinese consulate and beaten up. It's only in the last week or so that China has been designated a threat, and also their behaviour around Hong Kong violated many of the agreements that was made with the UK. So in many senses, it does seem that Britain, at least, has been slow to act, if to act at all, about Chinese human rights abuses.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I think Britain's response is starting to change and people are starting to wake up, but it has been extremely slow. And even the British government's response to what happened at the consulate in Manchester on Sunday, whilst I welcome the fact that a Chinese official has been summoned to the Foreign Office, it should have been the Chinese ambassador that was summoned, and the Chinese consul general in Manchester, who all the photographic evidence suggests was actually perpetrating some of the violence, he should be expelled, and he's still there as far as I know. So Britain is changing, but rather too slowly and not strongly enough.
Well, we should say that the Foreign Office says that the Manchester police force is conducting an investigation, and they'll respond after that investigation. But yes, it does seem pretty open and shut as a book, really. Benedict Rogers, thank you so much for joining us here on To The Point this morning on GB News. Really appreciate your time. So important that we got that story in just at the end of the programme there. That's all that we have today, I'm afraid. But please Do not go anywhere. We were talking about it throughout the programme, and indeed it's only a few minutes now until Liz Truss, the Prime Minister for how much longer, big question mark over that, will stand up behind her government dispatch box and face down questions from Sir Keir Starmer.
I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A bit of a cloudier day today for most. Some outbreaks of quite heavy rain in the west, and it's also in parts of the west where we've got some very gusty winds. Across the southwest, that's where we've got this area of low pressure that's been around for a while, and weather fronts throwing northwards from that weather system are bringing the heavy outbreaks of rain, some rumbles of thunder crossing Wales into parts of Northern Ireland. So quite a soggy scene here for much of the afternoon. Some of those heavy showers getting into parts of the West Midlands and maybe later today into northwest England. One or two more showers could come into the far southwest, but here generally turning drier. Some brighter spells across the southeast and particularly northwest Scotland with some sunshine. And it's pretty mild in the south, but it's also gusty, especially for southwest England and West Wales. Some very lively gusts of wind through this afternoon and this evening. During this evening, the rain showers will spread more across northern England and eventually overnight into parts of Scotland. Still some heavy bursts of rain likely. The odd rumble of thunder is possible. Further south, mostly dry.